everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's fireside chat on accelerating the adoption and usage of advanced analytics in retail, organized by Course 5 Intelligence. I'm Megha Chaudhary, Global Head of Marketing at Course 5 Intelligence, and your host for today's chat session. A little bit about Course 5 Intelligence, the host company. Course 5 Intelligence is a pure-play data, analytics, and insights company that helps organizations drive digital transformation using artificial intelligence, advanced analytics, and insights. We enable organizations to solve complex issues relating to their customers, markets, and competition at speed and scale through a combination of industry-specific domain expertise with AI-driven products and solutions that are IP-led and that leverage the latest technologies. We should talk a little bit about a few housekeeping items. For today's webinar, we're going to record today's webinar and we will be making it available on our website, www.course5i.com. We'll also be emailing all the registered participants a link to the recording. We encourage you to continue the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #AdoptingAdvancedAnalytics. And we also welcome your questions during the session. You'll find a Q&A button either at the bottom or on the top of your screen today. The chat is planned for 30 minutes, followed by 15 minutes Q&A, and I encourage you all to stay with us till the end. A little bit about our speakers for today. We are joined by Laura Wheeler and Anis Merchant today. Laura is currently the interim head of e-commerce at Rue21 and former leader of digital transformation at Gap. She is a digital leader who has led highly profitable, large-scale organizations developing innovative strategies to capture new markets in fast-growing environments and turning around struggling businesses. She has experience in some of the most highly regarded companies in the world, including McKinsey, Saks Off Fifth, and Ross Stores. Anis Merchant is the Executive Vice President Growth at Course 5 Intelligence. He has been driving large-scale applied AI and digital transformation initiatives for over 25 years for clients across major industries. His current focus at Course 5 is to leverage the applications of AI to solve businesses' needs. A lesser-known facts about our speakers today is both of them love their machines on the go. Anis loves his bikes and owns a Harley Davidson, and Laura loves boats and even owns one. That's fun. Both of them like to keep things moving on different turfs, though. Thank you, Laura and Anis, for joining us today and sharing your expertise with us. I will hand it over to Anis now to take it from here. Over to you, Anis.
Thanks, Megha. Thanks for sharing those intricate details about us. That's fun. So I'm on the road and looks like Laura is on the water, which is fun. And Laura probably will get to share our own experiences as we go through these conversations. Laura, thank you for taking time out. I know it's busy time. Just before we got started, like you mentioned, it's busy for you, and not only for you, but your peers and colleagues in the entire retail industry. But I was just thinking about it before we got started, and I was just reliving 2 years ago. About in February, I was in United States, right? Probably that was my last international trip. After that, things broke loose, right, with the pandemic. And at that time, I was going to stores, shopping, and doing many things. And when I look 2 years, things have changed dramatically. And it's not that they have just changed. They continue to change. They continue to evolve. Every day is a learning experience. And people talk about trends and trends which will scale up, trends which will not happen. In your mind, learning from the last 12 to 24 months, what do you see continuing, some of them which we have seen in the last 2 years specifically? Or I should say the third year we are getting into it.
Well, clearly, retail as an industry has been forever transformed, right? So I think we saw when stores shut down, the rapid move to digital, but that's not gone back in a large part. It's stayed. And I think there's been a new table stakes that have been set for retailers so that they need to be completely omni. You can't just live in a brick and mortar world anymore. If anything, COVID taught us that. And then now that we're in the omni world, we, particularly on the e-commerce side, need to really hone our digital analytics and be able to understand that customer journey as it moves from the digital world to the physical world and back again. And customers expect that. They really want us to understand them no matter where they're shopping.
No, you said omni-commerce, and I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I'll just give an anecdote here. I love Masters of Scale by Reid Hoffman and their entire team, and there is Capital One who's a sponsor in that most of the shows, and they bring on one of their customers. I'm bad with names, so I'm forgetting the individual name, but this person used to run flea market, and in US and in everywhere, flea market is physical. It's never online. And when COVID hit, and it was focused towards Black entrepreneurs who were participating in flea market, right? This was based out of Atlanta. And it was an interesting challenge. Like overnight, she had this individual who was organizing, she had 300 email list. So she went on and she said, okay, how do I grow this to 3,000? That was her focus. And she started seeing people coming in, and she had to change her game. She had to work with these Black entrepreneurs to help them understand packaging, messaging, branding, advertising from an online perspective, not just from a physical space. And that 3,000 grew to actually 30,000, and it keeps growing. And they have completely converted to a flea market, which was only a Saturday, Sunday, and now has been throughout 24/7. Right. It's an interesting story when it comes to retail, not the big retails which we often hear who are transforming digitally, but it's happening across the value chain, whether it's small mom and pop shop or focused on big players. But when you hear these companies transform, small or big, data analytics and AI is at the helm of everything, which at least I have seen, and they become successful with that. In your mind, how important is it? And there's a lot of hype about retail analytics, right? Analytics in retail is not new. Walmart was doing it since 1998, the famous Pamper and Beer stories we often hear as management students. Do you still feel that there is gap there in retail, specifically in the adoption of analytics and AI?
Yeah, I think that another thing that the pandemic exposed was sort of the breakage in the analytics and the bench line. And as I said, the table stakes moved up, the benchmark moved up, and some retailers really couldn't keep up. So I think what you've seen is a lot of pure play retailers have been doing this forever. They've built their business just like that flea market entrepreneur that you mentioned. They built their business on digital, and they were able to grow it that way, kind of organically. And so they had all the tools in-house that they needed because they acquired them slowly along the way. Whereas omni retailers, unless you're Walmart or Target, you didn't have the impetus to build those tools. You didn't have the investment to build those kind of tools and the systems that they've built. So you were bolting on as much as possible, and maybe having siloed experiences of an e-commerce environment and the store environment, but given data silos, there wasn't great visibility across those from a customer perspective. And once we moved into an omni world, that really just exposed. So I think what you see now is the have and the have-nots, right? The haves are either pure plays, little pure plays who've now grown big, but who have grown up in that world, or the big, almost tech-enabled retailers like Target and Walmart that have had the investment behind it to build those capabilities. And then a lot in the middle that are struggling and that are trying to adopt quickly and really need that analytical approach to build out and survive.
I'd like to double click on something which you mentioned, and that's always an interesting point in my mind, is table stakes for retailers, right? What is table stakes when it comes to analytics and AI for retailers?
Such a hard question. I think, table stakes is really understanding your customer at all touch points. And yet, I don't think that that is easy to achieve, right? And so I think every retailer needs to analyze their current positioning. Do you have a unified view of the customer? Do you have the ability to personalize and do predictive analytics that allow you to really get a one-to-one experience? Do you have the ability to communicate to your customer across multiple channels with one voice? Those, I think, are the outward experiences that a customer would want as table stakes. But I think the inward enablement is spotty. I don't think that you could really say there's one solution. I think every retailer needs to do that assessment and figure out how they build out those capabilities and where the gaps are.
So these famous words about customer touch points and end-to-end mapping and customer journey analytics, right? It's a big buzzword now. In the last 2 years, it has caught up more and more. And with privacy norms and ethic norms coming in, there will always be those gray areas or dark areas where you will never know what the customer or the consumer did in their entire journey. Mm-hmm. And companies, at least in our humble experience, we are seeing they are going on this vendetta or these big programs of, doing it 100% perfect. The question I would have, and you can be as candid and transparent, is it really possible in today's day and age that you can always get 100% visibility to customer journey?
No, it's definitely not possible, especially as the world evolves, with the iOS 14 changes had a huge impact on our ability to understand completely the customer journey. And I think that those are driven by privacy concerns. Those will continue to evolve. The degradation of the cookie is going to have a different manifestation of how it impacts us and how it evolves. And so your analytics team needs to be agile to be able to really react to that and then update the models and build a new way of thinking. But it's not possible to have an end-to-end. And the other thing I would caution is it's not even practical to try to build that, because you can't go away for 2 years and come back with a solution that you finally solved it, because the world changes too fast and you will end up with a solution that is not perfect and it took 2 years to build. It's much, much better to iterate along the way and figure out how to make things continuously better from the point you are, than to try to take on too much. It really is a challenge when you get lost in the data and are swimming in the data, or have just a too big of a system lift to be able to get the value.
I'll come back to this entire system lift through this as we move along, but there's one thing which I just want to double click a little further on this entire customer journey. When you look at the simplistic customer journey principles, is the AIDA framework, which is awareness, interest, desire, and action. And to your point about earlier, is it really, do you focus on all 4 or all 5? There may be an intent, or there are, as an advice which you would have to your peers, you focus on 1 and 2 which are more impactful. And for every company, it may be different, but what are those 1 or 2 which can really make a big impact when it comes to customer journey analytics?
Well, I think just understanding that baseline. So, you actually kind of described it even in the tee up there. It's that it may be different for every company, right? So if you don't understand the traffic volume at each stage of that, we call it the purchase funnel, then I don't think you know where to attack. Right. So you've got to be able to understand the journey, the volume, the opportunities, so that you can attack those things in your organization with the most strategic approach.
You mentioned the strategic approach, and I think that leads on to my next perspective is, there is a lot of good strategies, a lot of plans which companies start with. And some do not start with, right? As the companies are smaller, there's growth hacking, and there is being agile, being frugal, learn fast, fail fast, right? But is there a plan required in all of these things, right? All of these new startup concepts, even which large organizations are trying to adopt. Do you think the plan is still important?
The plan is very important. Yeah. You can feel your way through it, but you can also get lost in that. And, again, the other thing is if you don't focus on where the value is, then you can be doing a lot of activities that aren't really generating the return you need. So it's really important to start with an assessment of what you have versus what you need, and then build out iteratively in a way that focuses on the high value items first. And then by the time you get to the end, you might find the things that were low value or either have accelerated and they're more important and you can shuffle things around, or that they're just no longer needed. And so it's really important that you build that plan to make sure that you go through it in a logical way, and that you can actually see value all along the way.
Talking about value, there is one perennial initiative, I would call that word, in an organization which doesn't have any value, right? In its get-go, probably you may not realize value for the next 2 years. And it is basically about how you manage your data. Because getting the data together, getting the clean data, ensuring there is upkeep, there is governance, there is privacy control. There is no value from a dollar value immediately to any books. You may build a model on top of it, which may have a value. You may provide an insight on top of that data, which may have a value or may not, right? Or there may be a learning. But getting the data act together for any organization, if you have to build any financial model, there is no value. But it is important. It is very important, right? And the reason why, at least in my mind, I have seen that companies build this famous word, which I use, is data swamps rather than lakes, right? And that's where many companies are hurt by it, bitten by it, and they don't want to even talk about data lakes or data engineering. But in the last 1.5 years or 1 year, there's been a big uprising in companies hiring for data engineers. So is this an unsaid plan, or is this really a focus, or there is value behind bringing the data together or cleaning the data?
I think it is. It's just that realization that the folks who didn't have the capabilities are drowning. And I guess I suppose that to build on your analogy, the swamp is not a good place to be drowning, right? And so there is a need to build that foundation. This is not something that you can build on a poor foundation. So if you think you're in the business of data and analytics, you also need to be in the business of data structure and governance. That's the key to unlocking it. And again, when you're a startup and you built your systems either homegrown or very organically, and they've grown in a way that's not so swampy, then you might not notice that you're doing it. It might not be pen to paper. It might not be something that you have to draw out. But when you try to combine brick and mortar and e-commerce, and you try to look at different segments within your customers, and you're really trying to optimize the data, you need to have that foundation in place. So yeah, it's an investment, but it is the key to growing your analytical capabilities.
So if you have to prove that investments work, because it's not in 100,000s, right? It goes up to millions.
Yeah.
And it continues to go up. It doesn't come down. So in a CFO's mind, it's not a capital investment. It is an OpEx. And retail in OpEx is pretty, you don't want to have so much of OpEx line items in your P&L, because you want to control those OpEx, and this becomes a significant OpEx. How would you justify that investment? Building on what you've just said, how would you claim that? Because it goes back to that strategic plan. How would you justify that?
One of the things I do, or I've done in a number of companies, is I have my analytics team have their KPIs as incremental volume, right? So we're going to do X, Y, and Z this year, and it's going to build this, it's going to be this much value. And then, by the way, we're going to track it, because that's what we're really good at as an analytics approach in the team. And so we build out a lot of testing and learning, and we build out, we measure that against our targets. So, teams that would have a target of delivering 50 million, and every week or 2 weeks we have a thermometer, we're tracking against that. So I think it's really important that you also build those capabilities to measure and monitor along the way to ensure that you're getting that return.
Now, having that radar when you're flying a plane, you need to have those radars, like you're saying. You can't be flying blind, otherwise it's going to be a catastrophic event for the organizations.
Yeah.
Just switching gears and going back to that conversation which you were having, this constant start, stop, run, stop, start, we were all in December, we were all looking forward to Christmas and New Year. People were saying things are going to be easy in 2022. We are going to have fun. We are all going to go back, and then there's a new variant come back. I was listening to another podcast, and Sir Jeremy Farrar, who's based out of UK, he's the Fauci of Europe. He was saying this is going to continue for the next 2 to 3 years. Don't quote me. He said it. I'm not an expert on pandemics. He said it. And it just made me think that organizations, if they have not learned, they have to learn how to live with this. And especially retail, like you said, stores shutting down, opening, closing. If I just take it in a retail context, reduce time, increase time. And, how do you maintain staffing and, running of business? It's a monumental shift in the way the organizations are. So as a leader of driving business, what would you recommend other leaders in 2022, what they should be focusing on?
Ooh, that's such a hard one, because I think the one thing we've learned, especially like you said, as we've done the starts and stops in the recovery, is that the one thing that's consistent is change. And that really it is going to be about building agile organizations that can react quickly. So just as we said before, don't go away and build the master plan, like really iterate as you go through it. Do get the resources in place that can help on the analytics, because you need that plane radar. You need that the instrument panel that's going to tell you what's happening, because you're going to be reading different results and it's going to be confusing, and you need to figure out how to dig in and find the path forward.
Do you think, it's easier for startups to change and agile and move, right, quickly, but for larger organizations where they have category teams, where they have merchandising teams, right, which are responsible for categories and subcategories, depending upon how big the categories for them are. And today, consumer expectations is also changing. There is this new concept of Q-commerce, which is quick commerce, which you can get products delivered in less than 30 minutes, or even in Asia market, for example, it's 15 minutes, right? It's a big thing. 15 markets, you think about supply chain disruption, and it's not just focused on grocery anymore. It's everything, right? Packaged foods, electronics, everything, right? I could never imagine I could get a piece of a charging cable or an entire charging cable in 15 minutes, right? It was like people don't want me to get out of home to do that.
Right.
So consumer expectations are changing in many ways. Now, do you think it's easier for larger organizations to adapt to all of this so fast changing environments?
No, it's much harder for a bigger organization to pivot like that. Although I will say, the other thing that the retail industry learned is we were able to shut down stores in, a matter of days. And, there was these massive changes that happened in our business model where, stores were furloughed, e-com was on fire, and then now it's transitioned back. And so even big organizations have had to learn how to react really quickly, and they're building that muscle.
Okay. That's interesting, building that muscle. But building on further from these building muscles, when you think about analytics and AI, what is that critical muscle? Is it everything? Like, do people need to think about AI right now, immediately? Is it imperative, or focus on basics?
Well, I would say it's always important to focus on the basics. Again, that goes back to our table stakes conversation. But yeah, it's an imperative to build AI at this point with where we are in the macro environment. I think it's a absolutely becoming table stakes that organizations have AI, and maybe AI is a scary term that you might not think you have, but even just starting out with basic segmentation or a true, 360 understanding of your customer experience, that's what I would call steps on the journey. And so you might not consider that AI, but that's where you have to start, and that's how you have to start to build out these capabilities, as we've said, iteratively.
I'll just take a pause and I'll just put on a message to the audience who are listening in. If anyone, don't be shy. This is a conversation which is happening between me and Lara. If you have any questions, post it on the chat, Q&A window, and we'll be happy to take it on. Lara, just building on what you've just said, for me, retail is a very interesting industry. I've been associated with it for almost 15 years now. And there is this omni-commerce, Q-commerce, and many of these initiatives. And the perspectives earlier for many of the retailers was build everything in-house, right? Build those capabilities, whether it is supply chain, last mile delivery, and whether it is doing analytics also, right? Because it was core to them. Do you think that perspectives has changed, like build versus buy or partner in that kind of context also?
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization. And so certainly some organizations consider analytics a core capability, and therefore they need to own it. Other organizations are just too small, frankly, to build that. And then, it's gotten more difficult in today's environment to get any kind of resources. You and I were talking before this about the shortages in stores to have store labor or supply chain labor, but the sought after skills of online and analytics are so difficult to get right now because they are in high demand. And so sometimes it's just not practical to be able to attract that kind of talent. Sometimes you have to outsource it as a way to get in the game and to build initial momentum.
Very candid question to you. We saw a big downturn, right, in the early part of pandemic, which was mid 2020, right? Many retailers either filing for bankruptcy, shutting more stores. The good news was 2021 did not see much of that, right?
Right.
There was shutting down of stores, but not at that scale, which happened in 2020. Do you still see some of them getting impacted in 2022 and 2023? Your perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what we're having now is, people want to find a return to normal, but honestly, we're not there yet. And, I think we are seeing the knock-on effect of the reduction of stimulus, of, like you said, Omicron is having a second wave of impact on store closures or reduced hours. And so we're definitely not out of the woods, and we're just going to continue to have a lot of variability. I think that's the key word. Volatility, variability is what we're now living with.
Yeah. In big data terms, there were those three famous V's, right? Velocity, volume, and variety. Now,
right.
Especially in retail, there are these new V's which have come up with scare people. Big data used to scare people, and then I saw those three V's becoming seven V's, and those V's kept on increasing. But now in the business, volatility and variability is becoming a norm factor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
No, this has been interesting, Laura. But I would like to kind of always mix it up. So I would want to kind of do a rapid fire and get your perspectives on certain things. So I hope you're fine with that. And,
Sure.
And there are some questions coming in, so I'll get those questions before after we do the rapid fire. But the first, and you know how rapid fire works, I don't have to explain, but one word when you think about what I say, new trends in retail.
New trends in retail. Wow. Personalization, not new, but personalization, important.
Consumer first.
Consumer first is an imperative.
Influencers in retail.
Influencers in retail. What, use with caution?
Yeah. Supply chain in retail.
Supply chain in retail is volatility. That's your new volatility.
Buy now, pay later.
An enabler.
Partners in retail.
The new frontier.
Brands in retail.
The old guard. You can't, you need to have that.
Omnicommerce.
An imperative.
There is a question, so I'll come to that rapid fire question a little bit later, but Q-commerce, the concept which I spoke about earlier.
Yeah, I do think that is Q-commerce, social commerce. These are all the new frontiers. And this is why you need to be able to understand your customer journey and figure out where, there's a good example. There was a company in the US, I think it was called Jet Black. And they were doing that in on-demand Q-commerce in the early days, but I think they built it too big and too robust. And I think it's going to have to grow organically and in certain categories. You can't have everything on demand. It's just not reasonable, but there are certain things that it makes sense for.
Yep. No, thanks, Laura, for this rapid fire. I know it was a little left ball for you. But there's a question on this entire piece, which I had a question on the rapid fire, which is this entire store-in-store concept. It's a very interesting space. I would say the entire physical space is almost like I foresee retail becoming a physical store, becoming a community forefront.
Yeah.
And that's why store-in-store concepts are gaining more traction also in my mind. And they are becoming like we've seen that with Target, with Best Buy, with Walmart, they're doing more of these store-in-store. How do you see that evolving? And, that's the question from online, offline, and building the brand. Is it just about gaining market share, or is it much more than that, the store-in-store concept?
I think the store-in-store concepts are brilliant. I think that what's happening is everyone in 2021 had, acquisition costs through the roof, right? Customer acquisition costs have just exploded. And what used to be really easy to do in digital marketing is becoming much more difficult. So these bigger retailers have realized they have shared customers, shared overlap, and there's an opportunity to acquire customers through partners a lot more reasonably than going out and finding them and buying them yourselves. And so something like, these partnerships with beauty companies, with traditional retailers, just makes a lot of sense in terms of customer acquisition, and there's not that much cannibalization. So I think it's actually brilliant.
There's a question which has come up on Q&A from Vasu, and I'll read it out. So he's focusing his question on India, but I would ask you from an emerging markets, right? India or Southeast Asia or Latin America. What do you think the impact of e-commerce is in consumer goods specifically, largely, whether it is packaged goods or groceries? What do you think as an impact?
The developing markets are so interesting because I think, you can almost use the pattern of cellular, right? Like there was not a big evolution in some of the places of landlines. They just jumped to cellular. And I think that will happen as well on the e-commerce side in a lot of developing markets. They will actually become innovators, and like the Q commerce that you mentioned is, I think, starting more to take traction in some of the developing markets faster than it did in some of the more mature markets because of necessity, because of not legacy systems with supply chains, but being able to be kind of agile and entrepreneurial.
No, and just building onto the cellular concept, Vasu, what I have seen, especially in developed markets like US and major parts of Europe, everybody's on the same level playing field. There is oversaturation of cellular, there is oversaturation of internet. But when you look at emerging markets like India or Latin America, there's still a lot of gap between what I would call as urban, semi-urban, upper rural and rural parts of those countries. There is so much penetration still to be done. And what e-commerce specifically is allowing these countries and these brands is to tap into those markets where, we all know that an individual in emerging market may have a phone, which is a smartphone, then a computer or a laptop, or even a TV at home, but they would prefer a smartphone. And through that smartphone, they get access and visibility to the entire world. And I would say when I call that categorization is spending the urban, semi-urban, upper rural and rural from a basic class, they do have the spending power, right? Not like
Absolutely.
urban, but they do have that spending power, which allow them to brands to tap into that spending power, which earlier in the good old physical retail, it was difficult. It was aspirational. They were never able to get to it. Now they are able to get those products and brands to those population, which was not possible.
Absolutely.
No, I think we'll just wait for a minute. There are no questions, but I do have a question. Laura, what's keeping you awake right now in your role as a Chief Digital Officer with Rue 21 right now?
Oh, so much. We are we are in the process of building a foundation, which is pretty exciting. But it's hard work. And so building that foundation, knowing what the end state is, and trying to figure out how the pieces come together, that's kind of like where I'm at in our journey. And that is a challenge that's keeping me up.
All right. No, Laura, this has been fun. It looks like our audience is still shy. They may not have questions, but we have your email flashing on the screen. Yep. My email also flashing on the screen. Hope you don't get a lot of spams, but we'll welcome any questions which people may have. No, thank you, Laura. This has been really great to have you on this platform. We really appreciate you taking time out. It's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.